Welcome to the Religion Unplugged podcast. I'm Meagan Clark, the managing editor of Religion Unplugged, and here with me is our intern, Mattie Townson. Mattie wanted to profile a religious celebrity and has been looking at the Baha'i faith, so she thought, why not Rainn Wilson, who's known for playing Dwight on The Office, of course, but is also a practicing Baha'i. So today we have with us Rainn Wilson. So welcome.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be speaking with you.
Yeah, well, I think the first very obvious question is, what is the Baha'i religion? Because most of our audience is probably not familiar at all with this religion. So can you give us a brief overview of what is Baha'i?
Sure. What is Baha'i? Okay, good question. So in the Baha'i faith, there is one God. And this one God, this all-loving providence, this all-knowing, all-seeing, wise beyond measure, beyond time and space, creator, entity, we can get into that later, wants to educate humanity here on planet Earth spiritually. So how does this creator do that? Well, every couple hundred years or couple thousand years or something like that, this divine creator sends down specially anointed, specially appointed divine teachers. Um, you could call them prophets. Some call them, messengers. In the Baha'i vocabulary, they're referred to often as manifestations. They're manifestations of God. So these special teachers you've heard of, and many of your readers have heard of, going way back to like Zoroaster, Abraham, Krishna, some of the super early ones, then the Buddha, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and Baha'is are followers of what we believe to be the most recent in this lineage of holy teachers, the Bab and Baha'u'llah, who are two extraordinary men who lived in Persia, now Iran, in the mid-19th century. The Bab lost his life. He was martyred. He was killed by the authorities in a similar fashion as Jesus was. And Baha'u'llah was banished and spent his entire life in prison. He followed the Bab. The Bab, in some ways, could be comparative to John the Baptist, a forerunner who talked of someone greater than he with a even more powerful spiritual message. So Baha'is are followers of Baha'u'llah, mainly. If there's people who are like, well, the Baha'i faith sounds like Unitarianism, you kind of believe in everything, you believe in all these faiths. It's like, well, no, Baha'is are followers of Baha'u'llah. We believe that Baha'u'llah is the manifestation of God, the messenger, the divine teacher for this day and age. We're followers of Baha'u'llah, but we also follow and revere Muhammad, the Quran, the Bible, Jesus, the writings of the Buddha, etc. We don't follow, the rites and rituals of those faiths, but the essential core teachings of those divine teachers we're into. There's about 5 or 6 million Baha'is around the globe. It's the second most widespread of the world's religions. Next to Christianity, it's pretty much anywhere you go in the globe, there's Baha'is. May not be a very large community, but if you go to, Mongolia or Cambodia or New Zealand or wherever, there's a thriving Baha'i population. And Baha'u'llah's teachings are very, I think what you would call like progressive social teachings that are here for the unification of humankind. And this is why I'm a Baha'i right now, especially in this current political climate, that Baha'u'llah's message is one of love and unity and bringing people together. So it's elimination of racial prejudice, the equality of women and men, the elimination of extremes of wealth and poverty, universal education, the harmony of science and religion, that these two forces are actually in unity, working in harmony. They don't need to be at odds with each other. And there's many, many more teachings. Baha'u'llah spent his whole life in prison. I won't go into the history, but he wrote hundreds of books and tablets and prayers and letters and what have you, mystical writings, meditations, koans, you name it. They fill hundreds of books. And that's basically it.
Great.
There's so much in there.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of questions.
Okay.
So tell us about your spiritual journey to Baha'i, and what did your conversion look like? I know you grew up in the faith, but how did you kind of come back to being a member of the Baha'i faith?
Yeah, great question. So yes, I grew up in the Baha'i faith. My parents were Baha'is. They became Baha'is in the early mid 60s. And then oodles of people became Baha'is in the late 60s and early 70s. So it went from a religion that had, I'm kind of speculating here, but maybe 30 or 40,000 believers. And then that kind of quadrupled
In the US,
over
right? Or worldwide?
in the US, yes.
Yeah.
And that like quadrupled in like 7 years. So just like really exploded. There were a lot of Baha'i actors and celebrities and artists and whatnot. So I grew up, I was born in 66, so late 60s, early 70s. And it was great. You know, my parents had wonderful, thriving Baha'i talks at their house. But, you know, when you go to a Baha'i talk, it's not to like, oh, we're going to try and convert you to the Baha'i faith. Although we're certainly teach people about the Baha'i faith, but the goal isn't kind of like conversions. We talk about Buddhism, we talk about the Bible and spiritual ideas and life's big questions, which kind of led me later on to found the media company Soul Pancake, which was based around this exploration of life's biggest possible questions. And it was fabulous, very racially diverse. Actually, the second largest religion in South Carolina is Baha'i. Many of the African American believers and friends during that time period were very attracted to. They were very attracted to this message of unity, harmony, and kind of, for lack of a better phrase, social justice in not in all of its connotations, but in the essence of what it means, finding more justice in society, and eliminating prejudice. So I grew up in that milieu, and then when I started acting, I went off to New York to go to acting school, and I just, like a lot of young people, I just jettisoned anything and everything having to do with religion. So I didn't want to be held down by morality. I didn't want the religion of my parents. I just wanted to move to New York City and do whatever I wanted to do as a young bohemian artist, you know, on my path. So of course, got in a lot of trouble doing that. You know, read the tea leaves, but basically, and there's a much longer version of this, but to boil it down, and I'll do a little plug for my book, The Bassoon King. It's back here somewhere, where I kind of go more in depth and into some of these stories, my memoir. But basically, I found myself kind of lonely and unhappy, depressed and a little lost. And I was living my dream. I was an actor in New York City. I was working in the theater. This was beyond my wildest dreams as a suburban boy from Seattle, Washington. And I thought, well, maybe I kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater when I jettisoned the Baha'i faith, or jettisoned religious faith completely. So I went on a quest. Really, I went on a spiritual journey. I read the world's holy texts, and went to many gatherings and meetings, and just spoke to people and studied and learned, and then eventually came back to reading the central texts of the Baha'i faith, and kind of had that kind of second conversion in my heart, in my, I guess it was my mid-late 30s, and came back to the Baha'i faith then in the late 90s.
Okay.
One thing I'm really curious about is, I'm sorry, I just wanted to get one question in, is,
Oh, you're good.
you talk a lot about Baha'i, not the Baha'i teachings, but it sounds like the talks are about several different religions and drawing from, sounds like some of the best of every different major world religion. It's almost like studying comparative religion. Can you talk a little bit about what are the talks like? Are those more academic? You said they're not trying to convert anyone. They're open to the public. And I know you've mentioned before having belief nights at home. What does that look like? Um, for someone who's coming from outside, how do they go to one of those talks? Or uh, do outsiders who don't believe in all of the teachings come to some of those talks, have religious dialogue?
Yeah. So great question. And, all of the above. So a talk in the Baha'i faith where you're speaking about an aspect of the religion is called a fireside. That's just what we call it. We call it a fireside. Think of a fireside talk. It's informal. It's
Yeah.
warm. It's homey. It's conversational. It's taking the other person's kind of beliefs into account. And there's all kinds of different Baha'i talks and gatherings, and there are some where it's straight up like, hey, do you want to know what the Baha'i faith is? Well, you can tell you what the Baha'i faith is. Sometimes it'll be about, let's talk about the intersection of science and religion, and we'll offer a Baha'i perspective on this teaching. Sometimes it's kind of like, let's just have an elevated discussion with people who are interested in spiritual topics and themes. And that can incorporate writings and teachings from lots of different faiths. And we encourage people to, bring quotes or share their ideas. And it's just kind of like a big kind of heady conversation, not academic. And we also, Baha'is also sponsor a lot of devotional gatherings, because that's one thing that we do believe unifies people, is that no matter what your belief system, we can come together and pray. And those are really beautiful. And we have Jews and born-again Christians and agnostics who bring a poem, let's say, and, we'll just do a real simple like meditation sometimes and read some Baha'i prayers and some stuff from the Bible or the Quran, and but kind of sit together, Quaker style, to share that the beauty and power and sacredness, really, of praying together. It's really interesting. And in contemporary America, you've got the people in the blue states meditate but don't pray. People in the red states pray and don't meditate. So even there, you have this kind of divide between the two halves. So I find that very interesting. So Baha'is pray and meditate. Like, we'll meditate and we also pray because we believe in God and the power of prayer. And you can pray just from your heart, or you can, have a Baha'i prayer book that has actual prayers. So those are all kinds of ways that Baha'is gather and have these discussions.
Great. Yeah. So with that, how is your daily life different as a Baha'i, and what are like your practices and rituals that come with being a Baha'i?
Great question. So for me as a Baha'i, I wake up in the morning and I read, Baha'is are told or asked, encouraged to read some of the Baha'i holy writings in the morning and in the evening. That can be as simple as a sentence. So I wake up in the morning, I read usually a writing of Baha'u'llah, sometimes of the Bab, sometimes of Baha'u'llah's eldest son named Abdul Baha. It's a lot of weird sounding Middle Eastern names being thrown at you, but I would say 5 days a week. I then pray and meditate in the morning. It's really pretty simple. Baha'is are also asked to, I have prayer beads. In fact, they're over here somewhere. I don't know where they are. We say a phrase, Allahu Abha, 95 times a day. That just means God is all glorious. So it's kind of a meditation chant. then I'll say prayers, and I'll just be in stillness and have I have a personal meditation practice. Would love it to be 7 days a week, but in all honesty, it's 5 or 6. Then Baha'is everywhere say a prayer, a special prayer called the Obligatory Prayer, where we really are asked to say this every day. There are several options, but there's a short option, and the daily Obligatory Prayer goes like this. It's very short, don't worry. I bear witness, O my God, that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee. I testify at this moment to my powerlessness and to thy might, to my poverty and to thy wealth, that there is none other God but thee, the help in peril, the self-subsisting. So one thing that's really beautiful about this prayer is, thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee, is the meaning of life is contained in this one sentence of this prayer. There's 2 sentences in the entire prayer. I've been created to know and worship God. That's it. Well, you might think you know what that means when you hear that. Oh, know and worship God. Like, oh, I know, I read holy writings about God, and then I say a bunch of prayers to this God. But to know and worship God, if you want to kind of really dissect that, it starts to get very complicated. It's like, in the Quran, the Prophet Muhammad says to know God is to know thyself. So in knowing myself better, I know God better, because there is part of God in me and in Mattie and in Meagan and in every listener out there. So we contain the qualities of God, the virtues of God: kindness, humility, compassion, honesty, etc. And we struggle with those. And we've struggled and failed sometimes, and sometimes we do better. So service to other people is, in the Baha'i faith, the highest form of worship. Work in the spirit of service is worship in the eyes of God, we are told by Baha'u'llah. The creation of art is a worship of God. That's a really beautiful thing. So you ask, kind of, how does being a Baha'i affect my day? And basically, if I know my meaning of life, if I know my purpose, to know and worship God, and if to know and worship God is that very multicolored, multifaceted, multivariegated kind of exploration of what it is to be a human being, to be kind, to serve, to create beauty, to bring people together, to love and appreciate nature, that's all part of it. I also think that the Baha'i faith works in, and I think any spiritual practice, most every spiritual practice works on two paths. One is we want to make ourselves a better person. So we pray and meditate. We want more serenity. We want more tranquility in our lives. We want more peace, more happiness, more joy. We want to be better people. That's one part of it. But there's another part of every spiritual practice, which is, can we make the world a better place? How can my spiritual tools help make the world better? And this is a really important part of the Baha'i faith, is that wherever you go, you see Baha'is working in their communities to try and actively make the world a better place. So it's not just about personal salvation. It's not just like, Baha'is don't really believe in heaven and hell in the same way that Christians do, but it's not about like, oh, I believe in Baha'u'llah, therefore I'm saved. It's really like, I believe in Baha'u'llah, so I have to work my ass off to try and make myself a better person and make the world a better place. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's it in a nutshell. And just that acknowledgement, Mattie, that I am a spiritual being having a human experience. I'm stuck in this weird, fleshy Rainn Wilson body for, 80 or 90 or 100 years or something like that. And then the body goes to the wayside, and then my consciousness, soul, spirit, whatever it is, continues on its infinite spiritual journey. And so a daily awareness that I am a spiritual being.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So I have one question. So, for example, maybe you can get into the afterlife a little bit more. Like, where do you think like a person like Dwight would go based on his life choices?
I've never heard that one before. That's fantastic. Um, the Dwight is walking down the streets of Scranton. He's hit by a bus. He's got some vaguely Amish authoritarian Christian beliefs from his childhood. But he hasn't really done much about his spiritual life. He's not terribly compassionate, let's say. He's a hard worker, determined worker, good worker. But so in the Baha'i mythology, cosmology, everyone has a soul. And when we're done with this physical plane, we move on to the next plane of existence in some way, shape, or form. Depending on how many of these spiritual qualities that we have manifested, grown, encouraged during the course of our lifetime, this will affect us in the next plane, the next world, call it heaven. In the Baha'i faith, there's no hell. Hell is simply an absence of God or a distance from God or a distance from good. That's kind of being in a kind of a hell. And I was in kind of a hell personally myself when I was in my 20s in New York City, distant from God, trying to find my way, indulging in way too much kind of sex and drugs and alcohol and ego, just kind of ego. So that's a kind of a hell, but it's not specifically like a place of, brimstone, and Baha'is don't believe in Satan. In fact, when Abdul Baha, the eldest son of Baha'u'llah, he came to the United States and North America and traveled around. And a journalist asked him when he arrived in New York City, Abdul Baha, which means servant of Baha'u'llah, servant of glory, do Baha'is believe in Satan? And Abdul Baha said, yes. Satan is the insistent self. So I love this idea that we all have a very strong, insistent self inside of us. It wants us to have more, to be better liked, to have higher status, to get what we want, to be resentful of perceived slights, whatever it is. This is Satan, really. This is the battle where we are fighting, the insistent self. So we'll all go to this. The analogy that's often used is in the Baha'i faith. The analogy that's most often used is the baby in the womb. So the baby in the womb is growing its arms and legs and fingers and toes and eyeballs, all the stuff it's going to need in this physical world. We are growing our spiritual limbs, our spiritual arms and legs and eyeballs and earlobes and hair and whatever we need spiritually in the next world. If you don't grow them sufficiently in this world, you'll be at a deficit in the next world, certainly. And no one is perfect, but we try and do the best we can with what we're given.
Yeah. Another thing you mentioned, was Baha'i teaches these social justice values that's more socially progressive. And I wondered if there's any tension there about, for example, what do Baha'is think about alcohol, drugs, sex, like homosexuality, tattoos, and then gender roles? And is there any tension there, or is it?
Yeah.
What did you mean by socially progressive?
Yes. So socially progressive in many ways. Some might say socially conservative in others. Progressive in that fighting for rights and fighting for the rights of the oppressed even and fighting economic injustice is super important in the Baha'i faith. Fighting for the rights of women. I mean, the first woman who took off her veil as a form of social protest in the Middle East was a Baha'i woman, Tahirih. She was a poet and a famous Baha'i.
Oh, that's interesting.
mystic.
I didn't know that.
And for this, she was thrown in a well and stoned to death. But because the Bab and Baha'u'llah taught that women and men are equal and women should have an equal place in politics and arts and society and social structures, this is heresy in the Muslim world in the 19th century. It still is through much of the Muslim world today, and women are still struggling, you know, a la hashtag Me Too, you know, today. We've got a long ways to go. So these are some, there are many more, but these are some socially progressive ways of at the Baha'i faith. Baha'is don't do drugs or alcohol. There are moral teachings. We don't do drugs and alcohol. We don't gamble. Sex is a tricky one in the Baha'i faith. There's very little written about it, but what we do know is that sex is allowed between a married man and a married woman in the Baha'i faith. So some people, you know, you'll put stuff about the Baha'i faith online and they'll say, well, you're homophobic or you're transphobic or whatever. As far as gender roles goes, that's in the Baha'i faith to be decided between a person and their doctor, and how they, you know, identify. We don't really get into that very much as a religious faith. But basically, it's a tricky topic to unpack, because for a lot of people on the political left right now, if you don't wholeheartedly just completely embrace homosexual sex in all of its iterations, then you're homophobic. And I get that. I understand that. And that's coming out of, you know, centuries of oppression of homosexuals. In the Baha'i perspective, these teachings are moral guidelines. Again, there isn't a hell. So the moral guideline Baha'u'llah gives us is sex is best between a married man and a married woman. And there's not a whole lot more writing than that around it. And so there, bottom line for the Baha'is, we love everyone, we accept everyone, everyone is on their path. My son's godfather is as gay as Christmas morning. I work with people of all different gender identities and sexual identities, and Baha'is do as well. As a Baha'i, you know, I believe that Baha'u'llah's teachings help the guidance of my soul, help my soul on its journey through this physical plane and onto the next world. And but it's a very tricky one. It's a difficult topic, you know. I personally, Rainn Wilson, as far as homosexuality goes, I personally believe, that anyone should have sex with whomever they want in whatever way they want and identify however they want. And we just love each other and help each other in every way, shape, or form. And also Baha'is are called upon to fight for the rights of the oppressed. And if you know, the LGBTQ community is being oppressed in any way, Baha'is will be at the forefront to defend their rights. So it's nuanced, but it's often painted as a black and white thing, but again, it's a variegated kind of intersectionality with those issues.
Yeah. So I have a question. I've heard you describe the US as somewhat of an outrage culture. So do you think that Trump not being elected, do you think that will change Biden being president? Or do you think that we'll continue to have this sort of like, we feed off of being angry and just
yelling at each other
question.
for our differences?
Sure, sure. Great question. And listen, Baha'is don't get involved in partisan politics. So we'll never be a member of a party. We'll never put a yard sign in our yards. We don't donate to, political candidates and whatnot. Do we believe that certain candidates are wiser and kinder and more aligned with our values? Yes. We vote. We participate on a local level in political action. We'll go to Black Lives Matter marches or what have you, but we don't get involved and we don't raise money, et cetera, politically. Because as a Baha'i, we believe that the political system is so broken fundamentally at its core. How many billions of dollars? Let me ask you guys, and I need to research this too, maybe when this whole election is over. How many billions of dollars were spent on this election? I mean, the election. I mean, all the candidates and all the ads and all the Facebook ads and all the billboards and their all the people that work for the candidates, etc. Like billions. I see you frantically.
It's like $14 billion.
Yeah. So Meagan's Googling 14 million. What could we do with $14 billion? What could we do with $14 billion to help the world? Could we, with $14 billion, could we give everyone health care? Maybe. Be kind of close. So obviously we need leaders and we need elected leaders and whatnot. We're not talking about not having that. But the system that is based on power, corruption, money, fundraising, kind of bite-sized messaging. I was thinking about this when you watch the presidential debates. At the end, it's like, who won the debate? And it's like, well, whoever won the debate is the person who scored the most insults against the other person. Oh, Kamala Harris had a great zinger. She said, blah, 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 blah. And like, oh, she really got him with that one. And it's like there's these scorecards as if the qualification for leadership is an ability to score verbal cuts on another person. What if qualification for leadership is to be the most humble servant in the room? And so what we need to do is completely eliminate the entire way that politics is constructed. So Baha'is just don't get involved. I remember my father, who just passed away a few months ago, but he was a great Baha'i teacher, and there was some born-again Christians came over to the house, and we were talking about the kingdom of God on earth, and my dad brought up, the resurrection, or what's it called? I forget. But the kingdom of God on earth, and they said, well, the
second coming, you mean?
The second coming, and they were like, the clouds will open up, there's a rumble, there's thunder, there's lightning, Jesus will appear on a cloud, the city will come down, and all the saved people will get on the city, and it'll float away into the air. And my dad, just long story short, said, well, Baha'is believe a similar thing. There's rumbling, there's clouds, there's lightning, the clouds open up, but instead a bunch of bags of cement, lumber, nails, hammers, shovels fall from the sky, and then a piece of paper floats down and it says, Kingdom of God on Earth, build it yourself kit. So this idea that we need to build this kingdom of God on earth here, that's a more loving, generous, connected, unified place, and partisan politics is ripping us apart. It's just literally ripping apart the soul of this country. So,
well, building the kingdom of God on earth is very Christian too. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit to this about, the reckoning we've had with racism, the polarization. What are some of the spiritual tools that Baha'i teaches to address racism, or, at a micro level, something that's actually achievable by a community? What are some of those spiritual tools to help someone fight racism within themselves, within their community, to create a better culture of unity across the political divide? and try to bring some healing to their circle, maybe on social media even during the pandemic?
Right. That's a great question. I don't know how specifically I can get into that. It's something I would actually like to research more, because it's a really perfectly posited question. It's fine to talk about healing racism as a kind of a pie in the sky thing. It's like, so what do you actually do? So in terms of
Yeah.
actual spiritual teachings in the Baha'i faith, we're taught that we're all children of God. Women and men are the same station, which might sound obvious today, but 100, 150 years ago, women were considered lesser beings, and that people of all different races are all equal in the sight of God, and that God is inherent in all of these people. So we see the divine in everyone. There's many teachings in the Baha'i faith that specifically aim to heal racism. Ones that are about like making sure that you're putting yourself out to, I don't have the exact quote in front of me. I don't have it on the tip of my tongue, but there are many teachings about putting yourself out of your comfort zone, essentially, and interacting with and being with and getting to know and asking for the stories from people of different racial backgrounds than yourself. Well, that's a really easy one. And it might sound kind of obvious, but we don't do it. We just don't do it. White people hang with white people, black people hang with black people, Latinos hang with Latinos. It's very segregated. It's very rare that people are really mixing it up. And Baha'is are encouraged to mix it up as much as possible and to develop deep and lasting friendships with people of other races. And, so it works on a number of levels. That's the friendship level. We talked about the spiritual level. And then on the social and political level, making sure that the laws and institutions contain these same spiritual principles of equality, love, mutual respect. And a lot of our institutions fall way, way short of that. So Baha'is are very involved in, looking at institutionalized racism, which is so insidious and grotesque in so many ways and has been around for, hundreds and hundreds of years. It's going to take a long time to really stamp that out. There's also Baha'i teachings about making sure that voices are heard of people of color, and that they're promoted, listened to, respected. And there's a great letter by the grandson of Abdul Baha, so the great grandson of Baha'u'llah, Shoghi Effendi, who was kind of the leader of the Baha'i faith for a long time. It's called Advent of Divine Justice. And in this, he diagnoses the racial problem in the United States. And he gives a solution to both the African American and the white American followers in this letter. And the part of the white, and I'm going to terribly paraphrase this, is for white people to watch essentially their privilege and to check their privilege. And he was writing about this in the 1920s. Our arrogance, our entitlement, the way we hold forth as white dudes, I'm speaking of, kind of interrupting, think we know the best way, wanting things to go on our schedule. And there's a kind of a long list of he's like, hey, white people, you need to kind of check your privilege kind of at the door. And it's a really fabulous letter to dive into. There's a lot of articles written about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the top of the thing that comes to my mind, thinking about Baha'i, I actually lived in Delhi for a while in India, where there's a big lotus, it's called the Lotus Temple, which is where I first encountered Baha'i. And the temples, I think, are all generally architecturally the same, right? They show many different religious symbols and that equality very well.
Yeah.
But
all
yeah,
nine-sided.
the number one thing, right, yeah. The number one thing I usually think of, though, is the Baha'is in Iran, who are persecuted terribly. And we have a lot of religious freedom news, so we hear about them. So I wonder, what is the American engagement with that community, if anything? Or is that something that's discussed? I know, you were saying Baha'is don't get into partisan politics, which is pretty normal for a lot of religious groups. But obviously, what the US government does in Iran would really affect those people too. So, like, one thing that's been really interesting is the Trump administration's major focus on religious freedom. And, you know, Trump wants to attack Iranian assets, and Biden wants to reinstate the Iran nuclear deal. Is that something that the American Baha'i community closely follows, or how do they engage with that international scene of Baha'is who have less religious freedom abroad?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Baha'is are greatly persecuted in their homeland of Iran. Even now, they can just be locked up for no good reason. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, have died over the history of the Baha'i faith in Iran, because it is heresy to essentially start a new religion after Islam, essentially. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the bottom line. So,
and they kind of
and
come out
Iran,
of Islam, right? So it's especially frustrating for people
it's
that
especially
identify as that kind
heretical
of
as
Shia
opposed to
Islam.
like,
Right.
it's especially heretical, yes, because it does have its roots in Islam. And you know, Muslims are not as upset at Mormons, let's say, but it's the Baha'i faith is not an offshoot of Islam. It, in the same way that Christianity came out of Judaism and in some ways reformed Judaism, that's what the Baha'i faith seeks to do. But yes, that's especially bad for the Muslims. And you know, Iran is a theocracy, and this is one of the ways in which partisanship is really damaging, because sometimes I feel like the political left is way too easy on Iran. Like, oh, Iran wants peace and let's have a nuclear deal
Right.
that they're
Yeah.
obviously cheating on, and just be really allowing of them. And even though their human rights violations are just grotesque, but because it's kind of the right wing is anti-Iran, then the political left can't also be anti-Iran. It needs to be like pro-Iran, because we have to just take, even though human rights are terrible, we have to take the opposite tack that the Republicans are taking. This is the same in China, etc. So what do Baha'is do?
Yeah.
You know, we try and get the message out that the Baha'is are being persecuted there for no reason other than their beliefs. They're not allowed to go to university, for instance. They're not allowed to get married. They're not allowed to be buried in Baha'i cemeteries. There's these really gross and cunning and despicable human rights violations happening. And we would love to see reform in Iran. You know, we'd love to see it be actually democratic and not a theocracy. And but we don't get involved. It's a fine line where, you know, we could protest and we can help support bills and measures that are going through Congress, but at the same time, we're not
Like
calling for
lobbying
the
Congress.
destruction of, and Baha'is are loyal to the government in which they live. So the Baha'is in Iran are very loyal
Okay.
to the government, and no matter what that government is, Baha'is try and be loyal to the government and not sow disunity by being
Okay.
against a government.
Well, that's challenging.
That is challenging. Yes, that is challenging. I wonder, and there were many Baha'is that were killed in Nazi Germany, you know, and what's that like for a Baha'i who is told to like be obedient to government, and even if the government is pure evil, you know, that's
Yeah.
that's a tough one. But we try and just stay out of all the governmental systems. So,
Well, what's it like for you to have this very much less than mainstream faith as a Hollywood actor? Like, do people think it's cool, or just like you're a little weird?
weird, definitely weird. Yeah, there's fortunately, you know, people have been pretty accepting. I think for a lot of people, they're like, whoa, what the hell is this guy talking about? Like the guy who played Dwight, and he's funny and he's weird and does goofy movies and stuff on talk shows, and that guy's a Baha'i talking
But
about
it's not
God
like
all the
Tom
time.
Cruise weird.
It's
Not
not
like,
quite that out
that
there. It's
level.
not quite that out there.
Right. Like, I
There's
feel like
no,
Baha'i is pretty like a established religion.
yeah, and there's no secrets in the Baha'i faith. Like it's all there. You don't have to go through courses or behind closed doors to find out like what's really going on. It's all, and it's not, and we don't ask for your money either. It's free. So like Buddhism. So, but yeah, people think it's weird. They don't know really what to make of me as a comedic celebrity, especially, who's talking about his faith. So that's challenging, but this is who I am. I like to make comedy. I like to play characters and be an actor. I like to create content, and I love talking about like conversations that we've just had about spirituality and the Baha'i faith and God and the meaning of life. And that's just who I am. We have this podcast called Metaphysical Milkshake. We're getting ready to do
I was just thinking
season
about
2.
that.
Yeah, with Reza Aslan, who's a great, theologian and speaker and rabble rouser, and not a Baha'i, but a Muslim background. And we do the same thing like we've just been doing for the last 45 minutes, having conversations about life's biggest questions. So it's who I am. People think I'm weird. That's okay. They've thought I've weird my whole life. They thought I was weird when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons and chess in high school, and now they think I'm weird talking about the Baha'i faith. So whatever. Fine, people. I'm weird. Okay, live with it.
Yeah, so would you say this is your new career now, is exploring spirituality, really, like with Soul Pancake and the Metaphysical Milkshake podcast? What made you switch that direction?
Well, I wouldn't say new career, but yeah, it kind of, and I'm writing a book right now on spirituality, which is hard, and it's taking forever. Probably won't be done till 2023 or something. But I love these topics, and I love diving into them. I'll never give up acting. I just did this new show on Amazon. I'm producing a new show on Netflix. I'm creating scripted comedy podcasts, and going to go shoot another couple of shows and movies and stuff like that. So I'll always keep working as an actor, and I love doing it. But yeah, it's kind of more than my hobby. It's like I love conversations about spirituality, because I feel, young women of America, I feel very strongly that,
and men,
so many of the solutions,
listening.
I was speaking to you too, but so many of the solutions of what we need in the world can be found in spirituality, that there are spiritual tools and spiritual solutions to making the world a better place that can be found in all of the world's religions. And people need to turn more towards spirituality to help heal the world, heal themselves. The mental health crisis is off the charts with young people. The disunity and division in the world is off the charts. And we need to turn more and more towards a spiritual balm to heal us all.
Well,
Listen,
that's
I
a
should get
great way
going.
to end.
There
We
you go.
totally agree. Yeah. Thanks so
Excellent.
much.
You're on
Yeah,
board
we
with that?
definitely
That's
agree.
great.
Religion is a solution and not a problem in the world.
Yeah. There are many solutions to be found, and religion has unfortunately been a cause of great disunity, but it doesn't have to be. So
yeah, we're optimistic. Thanks so much for joining our podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on your wonderful podcast. And
awesome.
I wish you
Well,
the
I'll
very
share it
best
with you when we're
with
done.
all of it.